My project is titled Effective Acute Early Life Stress on Adolescent and Adult Fear Learning and Depressive-Like Behaviors. My name is Brianna Minshall. I'm a second year psychology PhD student, and I'm advised by Dr. Jennifer Quinn. So, a little bit of background to my study. Post traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, represents a spectrum of debilitating anxiety symptoms resulting from exposure to one or more traumatic events. The latest estimates using the criteria of the DSM 5 suggest a PTSD prevalence rate of 4.7% over the past year and a lifetime prevalence rate of 8.3%. Women are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop PTSD. Depression affects 4 to 5% of adolescents in the US and is a major risk factor for suicide during the adolescent period. Early life stress, or ELS, is a major risk factor for the development of depressive disorders later in life. Individuals with PTSD are more likely to have suffered adverse childhood experiences, pointing to childhood trauma as an important vulnerability factor for PTSD. The age at which stress exposure occurs and the age at which the animal is tested has a direct effect on behavioral outcomes. A better understanding of sex differences in psychopathology is critical, as there are sex specific trends in the prevalence of many stress induced anxiety disorders, and the activity of stress response systems is sexually dimorphic. So, the present series of experiments was designed to address whether early life stress yields age dependent and/or sex dependent vulnerability to subsequent stress enhanced fear learning, or SEPL, and depressive like behavior. So, for the first group of experiments, we looked at the effect of acute early life stress on adolescent and adult fear acquisition and expression. So, looking at figure one, panel A, you see the timeline. So, first on PND 17, animals received either 0 or 15 foot shocks in context A over a 90-minute session. Then moving to the top, this is the adolescent timeline, and the bottom represents the adult timeline. So for adolescents on PND 40, they underwent a context A memory retention test. So it was an 8-minute foot shock free session. The following day on PND 41, they received one foot shock and a novel context B over a 3.5 minute period. We call this fear conditioning. Then the following day on PND 42, fear memory was assessed during an 8-minute foot shock free session. And then the rats were retested on PND 92 in adulthood in the same context B. For the adults on PND 90, they underwent the ELS memory retention test in context A, so that 8-minute foot shock free session. They were fear conditioned in a novel context B on PND 91 and tested with an 8-minute foot shock free session on PND 92. So, what did we find? So, looking at panel B, we see that acute early life stress rats, fear conditioned and tested during adolescence, do not express supple. Adolescent female rats free significantly less in comparison to males. In panel C, we see that acute early life stress rats, fear conditioned in adolescence and retested in adulthood demonstrate supple. So, what I mean by that is this lighter bar represents animals that did not receive early life stress, and the darker bar represents animals that did receive early life stress. So, as you can see, for both males and females, the darker bars are significantly higher than the lighter bars. Finally, panel D, we see that acute early life stress rats, fear conditioned and tested in adulthood, also express supple. So, again, the darker bars are significantly higher than the lighter bars. Then the next group of experiments, we looked at the effect of acute early life stress on adolescent and adult sucrose preference and forced swim behavior. So looking at the timeline in panel A on figure 2, rats received either 0 or 15 foot shocks in context A on PND 17, and then were split into adolescent and adult. So for adolescents, they were habituated to 2 bottles of water on PND 35, not shown here, and on PND 39 began 14 days of sucrose preference. So rats received 1 bottle of water and 1 bottle containing a 1.5% sucrose solution. For the adults, they were habituated on PND 86 and began sucrose preference, the same as the adolescents, but on PND 94. Then after a 48-hour break at the end of sucrose preference, rats completed 2 days of forced swim testing. So what did we find there? Looking at panel B here, Acute early life stress has no effect on sucrose consumption in adolescents. However, females are drinking more sucrose than males during adolescence, and this was controlled for body weight. In panel C, we can see that acute early life stress and sex impact adult sucrose consumption, with stressed animals and females drinking more. In addition, the stress effect may be more pronounced in females. There's a trend toward significance. Looking at panels D and E, preference for sucrose over water is very high, regardless of stress exposure and sex. And then finally, looking at panels F through H, we see that females are showing more immobility in comparison to males and less swimming and climbing behavior in comparison to males. There were no differences based on age, so the data is collapsed across these three panels. And finally, acute early life stress significantly decreases immobility while having no significant effect on either swimming or climbing. So, what I mean by that is we can see the darker bars in panel F are significantly lower than the lighter bars, but then looking at panels G and H, there's no difference between stress groups. So, in conclusion, although rats exposed to acute early life stress during adolescence acquire more fear to a context that predicts a mild threat, they do not express that increase until adulthood. The level of fear expressed by these animals in adulthood is comparable to ELS exposed rats' fear conditioned in adulthood. Thus, there appear to be brain mechanisms that suppress exaggerated fear responses during adolescence. This has implications for the expression and treatment of trauma relevant behaviors that may show delayed emergence. In addition, acute early life stress appears to produce opposite effects on sucrose consumption and immobility compared to what has been observed with chronic early life stress exposure, although the effects of chronic early life stress have been somewhat mixed. Whether such findings should be interpreted as resilience with regard to the development of depressive-like behaviors remains to be determined. Future experiments are needed to address the mechanisms of increased sucrose consumption and immobility. Thank you.